Hello gentlemen, this is CS MGTOW. Today I want to review the Manosphere and our place in it as MGTOW. There's been a bit of recent bickering between well-known Manospherians such as Matt Forney. His unceasing attacks on MGTOW, however, are not the issue at hand here. The discussion, for me at least, is much bigger than one person. What's at stake here is which group within the Manosphere will form the dominant narrative that men encounter as they seek to escape the chains of gynocentrism and runaway hypergamy. So on one hand, will they encounter a group of men who are so beholden to their sex drives that the advice they offer to these newcomers is to man up, head right back to the plantation, get your goatee trimmed just right, kit out your wardrobe with expensive clothing, hit the nightclubs and bars, buy expensive bottle service, remember the names of the bouncers, and remember pre-scripted pickup lines. Is that what they're going to encounter? Or on the other hand, will they encounter men who hand out bad advice in the hope of making a quick buck selling, dating advice through books and consulting? Men who made very pertinent observations about male and female nature but fail to draw logical conclusions from their observations. Or will they find websites explaining that cohabitation and even marriage is okay if they find the right woman, possibly in a developing country, that women in the West have been corrupted by a great evil known as feminism, which of course is Marxist in origin, and the end goal is of course harming gender relations. So this second group of men, although well-meaning, due to the presence of women among their membership, are often unable or unwilling to tackle core subjects likely to benefit men. Or will these men who are new to the Manosphere, will they find a third group of men who have looked where others ignored or feared? Men who looked as far back as the origins of our species, deep into our DNA, so to speak, and how we humans respond to external environments based on internal drivers. Will these men find other men who tell them hard truths about our own faults as human beings, however hard it is to accept, regardless of who is offended? You see, gentlemen, I personally see MGTOW as the new abolitionists. With our work and contributions, each of us emancipate men who would otherwise lead lives of servitude when no longer deemed to be conveniently useful to his female master, or face the ignominy of divorce, financial ruin, homelessness, incarceration, or suicide. One mind at a time, one man at a time, we free slaves. However, as with the end of slavery, the change in sentiment towards slavery as an inherently evil practice came well before the change in legislation prohibiting the ownership of slaves. We can take some very valuable lessons from this. Firstly, our fight has never been political. And I say this with all due respect to my MRA friends, of which there are many. I respect and honor your work, but this is not a political issue. We firstly have to persuade wider society and ourselves that men are indeed human beings worthy of respect, dignity, life, and liberty. This is so fundamental a concept that it's worth repeating. Social sentiment must always precede changes in legislations. The current criminal justice process in the West has been shaped over thousands of years, where humans followed chivalric laws designed first and foremost in all practical terms to benefit women. This is a major part of why we see differences in sentencing between the genders, why women are awarded primary caregiver status in the overwhelming majority of child custody battles, because the vast majority of the public believe that a child's place is by the mother. The laws are merely a reflection of this belief and long-held norm. When you see women such as Tiffany Stevens caught plotting to murder her husband and then walk free with zero consequences, the link to this is in the description bar. While men such as Brian Banks are jailed, spending more than 5 years in jail for the crime of wet rape, based on the say-so of a woman who lied only to recant her testimony years after the man's livelihood and career were gone, you begin to understand that females' right to be secure in her person is more highly valued in our society than male life. Take a long, hard look into the human soul and you will find very uncomfortable truths that no amount of campaigning will change anytime soon. When you see male deaths spark outcry in the same manner as female deaths in the media. When the news treats male suffering as worth covering, when males are awarded space to grieve, when male genital mutilation is not supported by the medical community, then our societies may be ripe for legislative change, but not a single day before. So to my MRA friends in the Manosphere, your cause is worthwhile. But for you to achieve your goals, human empathy must be directed towards men for the first time in the history of our species. And to the men in the PUA community, I would say this. At the moment, your main concern with MGTOW is that we don't chase women with the fervor that you deem appropriate for any red-blooded man, and that we've somehow deviated from the path of the MGTOW founders, and that we dare to dig deeper, search harder for meaning, and apply our learnings to a new body of knowledge, that we dare to bring unrelated areas of learning. You falsely believe that MGTOW in its original form was a finished product. Finished products are for decadent minds. MGTOW is an evolving philosophy based on our understanding of human nature. When new research challenges our beliefs, should the research prove credible, we change beliefs. It's important to understand how humans learn and how our species develops knowledge. There's a rather fascinating book by the renowned psychologist Steven Pinker, and here's a quote from his book. When a large enough community of free, rational agents confers on how a society should run its affairs, steered by logical consistency and feedback from the world, their consensus will veer in certain directions. Just as we don't have to explain why molecular biologists discovered that DNA has 4 bases, given that they were doing their biology properly, and given that DNA really does have 4 bases, in the long run they could have hardly discovered anything else. We may not have to explain why enlightened thinkers would have argued against African slavery, cruel punishment, despotic monarchs, and the execution of witches and heretics with enough scrutiny by disinterested, rational, and informed thinkers. These practices could not be justified indefinitely. Once a community of thinkers enters a realm of understanding, they will be forced in certain directions regardless of their material surroundings. So, to the PUAs out there, try to understand that the reason why we have given up on marriage, settling down, or even relationships, and becoming worker drones, is that the evidence has forced us in a certain direction. For the first time in history, legions of men took a long, hard look at human nature, and we discovered hard, uncomfortable truths about ourselves as humans. And for the first time, we had a repository that documented what we considered previously to be isolated behavioral traits on the part of the human female. This, combined with the fact that we as a species, at least in the West, no longer want for food and safety, led us to question behaviors that we deemed better suited to an earlier age, an age that you look back at with fondness, but we recognize as exploitative and physically dangerous to men. When analyzing the data, both from learned experts, diverse areas of studies, and individual observations, we could not have come to other conclusions. Our actions followed logically on the basis of what we found. We observed that male-female relationships in many areas of importance to us individually had become zero-sum. And you're now mad that we place a high enough value on our lives not to throw them away. So we find ourselves in the same manosphere with groups who cannot and will not allow their actions to follow from their observations, who blind themselves to truths and hope things were better. Playing among children can be fun. Yes, the toys are colourful. However, no real learning can be facilitated unless we, as MGTOW, are among peers. Now, I'm not suggesting this must be a goal for all MGTOW to learn. I scarcely want to be accused of being a MGTOW elitist or subjugating my subscribers to a philosophy of learning for learning's sake. What I do suggest is that we may have outgrown the manosphere. The manosphere has become a straitjacket, unable to escape basic logical fallacies that end up having to be debunked again and again. Some of the more recent of which being, for example, that the family unit is somehow the building block of civilization. Another being that, women against feminism are our allies. Or, for example, that MGTOW are somehow advocating celibacy. We still have to debunk the false dichotomy of either advocating for political change or chasing boss gangs as the only two possible options for a man. And of course, we still have the issues of the ideas and opinions of women being placed over that of men. Even women who have very, very little to say have larger channels than MGTOW who bring out theories and do the heavy intellectual lifting. We still have the issue in the manosphere of it's the obsession of reducing the size of the state, which has been shown again and again to be an impossible task. The polarization of complex issues into left-right politics, despite deeper underpinnings. Segments of the manosphere are clutching onto failed and discredited ideas that in many ways have become their mantra. The manosphere as a whole is fast becoming a graveyard of intellectual ideas, much like the modern version of medieval witch hunts set forth by the papacy to root out and exterminate heresy among the faithful. We just have doxing, shaming, and attack video, not from feminists, but from idiots like Matt Forney, Davis, MJ Urini, Rouge V, and the clown Aaron Clarey. Men who have set themselves up as an intellectual bodyguard for their lost treasure, the family unit, and 2.0 children. Major portions of the manosphere are wed steadfastly to values that seem to be getting in the way of solving male problems. Long-held values that worked well in the past, but today cause to obfuscate, confuse, and stifle men. Firstly, we have the joint PUA-MRA devotion to mending relations with women. Perhaps to get a visual idea on why this is unlikely to work, let's take a look at a video. It's a pretty famous TED Talk by Professor Frans de Waal. He's a Dutch primatologist. And the talk was titled Moral Behavior in Animals. And I'm going to add a little bit of explanation to this video afterwards, but it's worth taking a look at.
Much more cooperative and empathic than they're given credit for. And so I started getting interested in those issues and studying that in other animals. So these are the pillars of morality. If you ask anyone what is morality based on, these are the two factors that always come out. One is reciprocity, and associated with it is a sense of justice and a sense of fairness. And the other one is empathy and compassion. And human morality is more than this. But if you would remove these two pillars, there would be not much remaining, I think. And so they're absolutely essential. So let me give you a few examples here. This is a very old video from the Turkish Primate Center where they trained chimpanzees to cooperate. So this is already about 100 years ago that we were doing experiments on cooperation. And what you have here is two young chimpanzees who have a box, and the box is too heavy for one chimp to pull in. And of course there's food on the box, otherwise they wouldn't be pulling so hard. And so they're bringing in the box. And you can see that they're synchronized. You can see that they work together. They pull at the same moment. It's already a big advance over many other animals who wouldn't be able to do that. And now you're going to get a more interesting picture because now one of the two chimps has been fed. So one of the two is not really interested in the task anymore. Now look at what happens at the very end of this. He takes basically everything. So there are two interesting parts about this. One is that the chimpanzee...
Now, do you notice that when the chimp on the left has food, you see how unwilling it becomes to help the other chimp? Even though it knows that the other chimp is, likely experiencing hunger because, of course, it was fed right in front of the other chimp. When one group or person has their needs met, what's the likelihood of this group voluntarily reaching back to help others? Evidence from our closest relatives suggests that this possibility is probably remote. Secondly, there is the issue of reciprocity. Women had an incentive to toe the traditionalist line up to about 60 years ago, before they could participate in an industrial labor force and before social safety nets. However, and I say this to the traditionalists and the neo-masculinity brigade, you no longer have anything that women want or need. Your status as a protector to her is now carried out by the police, whom she respects and fears more than she fears and respects you. And of course, she has an army of white knights who will voluntarily bash other men for grievances that you might consider trivial. Your status as a provider is now handled by her employer, or in some cases, increasingly, social welfare. Even if she decides to settle down outside of her physical prime, most likely, there's always a man waiting for her, willing to work slavishly for her benefit. So my question to you is this: why would women as a group behave in a manner that is cooperative and reciprocal with a stated goal of perhaps, let's say, alimony reform or parental access reform, when all of their needs are met by a society that your fathers helped build? The second major value that has been steadfastly wed to is the alienation of men who are not libertarians. Still, a huge part of the Manosphere insists that the goal of men should be to reduce the size of the states. And Barbarossa, of course, and Stardust have both covered this in a previous video. I'm going to be linking to these videos. And they discuss the futility of attempting to reduce the size of the state or to push for libertarian ideals. So I don't want to go over this ground here. What I will say is this: the libertarian agenda is and was always bigger than the Manosphere. It's an issue of the optimal way to organize our advanced industrial civilization. A monumental task of reducing the size of the state is a giant so large that whole nations have never managed it for long, and rarely without extreme sacrifice or even bloodshed. This is not why we are here. I personally, of course, would like a limited government, or even no government at all. However, I have no interest on pushing this on the Manosphere. This is not a goal for us. MGTOW is not a libertarian movement. Defeating the state is a fight best fought elsewhere. Thirdly, certain parts of the Manosphere display, after perhaps half a decade, an inability to leave well behind a number of outlandish and demonstrably false conspiracy theories that go along the lines of blaming cultural Marxism and the CIA for helping to sick feminism on Western society. Again, this has been covered by a legion of content producers, including Stardust, Razorblade Candy, Barbarossa, Girl Writes What. So again, there's no need to cover this ground here. Feminism is female nature given political voice. Yes, this may be hard to admit, that your supposed natural partners gain suffrage, but the first thing they would do is to, inadvertently enslave you? But we must face the truth. Women as a group have never had your best interests at heart. When they gain political power to match the power they already held over the home, they showed just how little they cared for you in clear terms. And coming to terms with reality is probably the best thing we can do for ourselves. So where do we find ourselves now? Frances Haylighton, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. She's a PhD, and she wrote that parents can often vacillate between being proud of and being scared of the achievements of highly gifted children. And this is an article she penned from, gifted people and their problems. And there's a really, really interesting excerpt in Steve Jobs' autobiography by Walter Isaacson that relates a story about Jobs coming to terms and realizing something about he and his father, and this is a quote from the book. "He was not an educated man," Jobs said, "but I always thought he was pretty damn smart. He didn't read much, but he could do a lot. Almost everything mechanical, he could figure it out," Isaacson notes. Jobs had been taught by his father that microphones always required an electronic amplifier. Jobs found that this wasn't true for a particular type of microphone, so I raced home and I told my father that he was wrong. "No, it needs an amplifier," his father assured him. When Steve protested otherwise, his father said he was crazy. It can't work without an amplifier." "There's some trick," I kept saying no to my dad, telling him that he had to see it, and finally he actually walked down with me and saw it, and he said, "Well, I'll be a bat out of hell." Jobs recalled the incident vividly because it was his first realization that his father did not know everything. Jobs said, "It was a very, very big moment that burned in my mind. When I realized that I was smarter than my parents, I felt tremendous shame for having thought that, but I will never forget that moment." This may be such a moment for MGTOW. The Manosphere both reveres us and hates us. They revere our theories and in the same breath demand that we not engage in inaction for the purposes of self-preservation. They tell us that since we can never expect fairness, we should still, as men, play the game. Again, the question comes up, is MGTOW natural? On a human level, it's a rather challenging question, since we might never know where biology starts and culture takes over, or to put it more scientifically, the extent to which our MGTOW behavior is a sexually dimorphic psychological adaptation. So for this reason, once again, I will turn to the animal kingdom. In the same TED Talk, the speaker explored the primate response to blatantly unfair treatment.
Getting grape and you will see what happens. So she gives a rock to us, that's the task, and we give her a piece of cucumber and she eats it. The other one needs to give a rock to us, and that's what she does. And she gets a grape, and she eats it. The other one sees that. She gives a rock to us now, gets again cucumber. She tests the rock now against the wall. She needs to give it to us. And she gets cucumber again.
The PUA position is that fairness is a social construct, that men and women have it unfair, so just deal with it, so to speak, just man up. And the MRAs also share this position, except that they believe that we can and should aim for legal change. So the experiments suggest that what we consider fair may be biologically driven, that is, that primates have an evolutionary driven aversion to inequality. During the evolution of cooperation, it may have become critical for individuals to compare their own efforts and payoffs with those of others. Negative reactions may occur when expectations are violated. One theory proposes that aversion to inequality can explain human cooperations within the bounds of the rational choice model, and may in fact be more inclusive than previous explanations. However, evidence now suggests that this sense of fairness is a human universal, in that it has been shown to prevail in a wide variety of circumstances and cultural variations. However, we are not the only cooperative animals, hence inequality aversion may not be uniquely human. Many highly cooperative non-human species seem to be guided by sets of expectations about outcomes of cooperation and the division of resources. This video demonstrates that a non-human primate, the brown Capuchin monkey, responds negatively to unequal reward distribution in exchanges with a human experimenter. The monkeys refused to participate when they witnessed the other monkey obtain a more attractive reward for equal effort. The effect was amplified if the partner received such a reward without any effort at all. These reactions support early evolutionary origins of inequality aversion, And we as MGTOW are partially through our non-participation responding to unequal reward and effort distribution. When we witness a society running to a large degree for the benefit of women, refusing to participate is quite natural, and so is being angry. It's a response to the environment. When you find women coasting through life, on government subsidies, affirmative action, when you see softer sentencing for women who commit the same crimes as men, then the only option left to you is non-participation. You see, I can understand if a man gets upset at what he sees, even if we can't do a damn thing to change it. And the fact is that the other parts of the manosphere either shame us for seeing through the blatant hypocrisy right in front of us, or they demand that we, behave like a Sisyphus who was compelled to roll, an immense boulder up a hill, only to watch it roll back down, repeating this, action forever. This may be a time for us to disassociate ourselves from the manosphere. We have nothing in common with the PUA or the Neo-Masculinity Brigade, whatever the acronym. They share our genitalia and some of our theories, but few of our aims. So how do we go about disassociating ourselves from the manosphere? On a practical level, this means not being baited by PUAs whose sole mission, it seems nowadays, when they're not being assaulted in cities, of course, is to accuse MGTOW of being basement-dwelling virgins, as if there's something actually wrong with that. Even if, let's say, we are basement-dwelling virgins, who the hell cares? Secondly, it means MGTOW might want to avoid giving out dating advice, advocating quote-unquote game, that thing where you spend most of your income and all of your free time chasing female validation. And furthermore, we may want to stop separating men into these artificially meaningless groups of alpha male, beta male, sigma male, gamma male, camps. These terms are meaningless and actually really serve to dehumanize men. Thank you very, very much. This is CS MGTOW.